All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are starting something new. Final Fantasy XIV has been getting huge news recently. It has finally overtaken World of Warcraft in a way as the most played MMO on the internet. And a while ago, some really amazing people started writing this super cool thing that is officially titled 5th edition D&D cross Final Fantasy XIV Classes and Races Compendium. And basically what it does is it takes the classes from Final Fantasy XIV, or the jobs, and translates them into 5th edition classes so that they play as similarly as possible to how they play in Final Fantasy XIV. And it is really cool. I've been following it for a number of years now. And it has grown leaps and bounds from its original incarnation. The original version, all the Final Fantasy XIV classes were so overpowered that you could never really put them at the same table as regular base D&D 5e classes. And through refinement and just a lot of work from the authors, whose names are escaping me right now, and I feel really bad. I'm going to see if I can find them real quick. Do they not have a... it looks like... yeah, I'm not 100% certain who it is, but I will actually have a link in the description below to the Reddit for this. It's r/ffxivxdnd. So you can check it out yourself. You can tell them how awesome the whole thing is. You know, all that cool stuff. So that being said, sorry, I have just... Come on. I have to get back to the right page. There we go. So, that being said, let's dive into what we're going to be covering today. Now, anyone that has watched the D&D Deep Dive knows I am a monk main in the D&D. My favorite character I've ever played is a monk. It is the one I've played the most. I've played Aether all the way from level 5 all the way up to level 17. I love monks. I play monks in every single game RPG I can. My main character in Final Fantasy XIV is named Aether. And when I started the game years ago, he started as a pugilist, which is the class that eventually can turn into the monk. And then at level 15, I found the ninja, which technically... Aether is a little closer to a ninja than a monk in the purest sense, because, you know, he goes through shadows and he can teleport and all that stuff, and ninjas can do that. So I went ninja. And then the cool thing about Final Fantasy XIV is you don't have to create a new character for every new class you want to play. You can play every single class on the same character, and each class has its own level, and you can create its own equipment set and all that's really cool. And so through the years, as new classes have come out, I have kind of switched up my main class. So I am going to start with my current Final Fantasy XIV main, which is not ninja, nor is it monk, though I may be getting back to my monk very soon because they finally worked on the monk. They kind of nerfed it really bad at the beginning of Shadowbringers, I think it was. I think even Stormblood, it was kind of screwed up. And they fixed it like 6 months ago or something. So I may want to go back to it. But my current main for the current expansion and for the new expansion, I'm not going to main the 2 new classes coming up, is the Gunbreaker. So that's what we're covering today. Now, for those of you who have no idea what a Gunbreaker is, Gunbreaker is a class based around what's called a Gunblade. The Gunblade was introduced in Final Fantasy VIII as the main character Squall's weapon, and the kind of secondary antagonist and primary rival of Squall, Cipher or Cypher, I've heard it pronounced both ways. Both of them were Gunblades as a specialist. And there are other characters that use them, but for the most part, like bad guys in that, for the most part, it was mostly just Squall and Cypher is how I always called it. The Gunbreaker is effectively how they brought Gunblades into Final Fantasy XIV. And the lore they created around it was actually pretty interesting. The Gunbreakers were parts of Royal Guards, basically. They were part of this group of Royal Guards called the Blades of Gunhildr. And they were meant to protect the Queen of Bozja, which is an area, as it was under attack from this evil empire of Garlemald. Now, Garlemald, all the people there are incapable of wielding magic. So they became a very technological society and even created this stuff called Magitech, which is basically artificer kind of stuff if you think about it in D&D. It's basically machines and things like that that can use magical power and basically simulate magical spells without the person using them being able to use magic. And one of the things that Garlemald uses a ton are guns. They almost have a monopoly on firearms in the world of Final Fantasy XIV. The Gunbreakers, the reason they're called Gunbreakers is they would use their gun blades to break the guns of the Garlemean, I think that's what the word is. They would use it to literally break the guns by all gun blades basically have this thing where they generally will have a blade, and it will have a trigger with basically a revolver attached to the blade, but there's no barrel at the end. It doesn't shoot bullets. And what would happen is whenever you pull the trigger, it would use these specialized shells to create these kind of energy waves that they could use in a bunch of different ways. And one of the ways they did it was they kind of slash and make this thing, and it would break the guns of the Garlemeans. So it's a pretty cool thing to explain why you have a sword with a trigger on it. You know, that's really all it is. Now, in MMOs in general, you have what's called the Holy Trinity. You have tanks, DPS, and healers. And that's how the vast majority of MMOs will work. You have tanks whose primary job is to get the enemy to focus on them so that the healer can focus just on healing the tank instead of having to try and heal everyone else. And tanks have all these different abilities that allow them to take a lot of damage and survive a lot of damage. Healers are exactly that. They heal people. DPS stands for damage per second. They do lots of damage. Now, in 5th edition D&D, we do kind of have that, but not really, because you can't really force a target to attack you like you can in an MMO. Though they do have some abilities that make it a little easier. Things like Compelled Duel. That spell kind of works like a taunt in an MMO. Gunbreaker is a tank class, so it is designed to be take a lot of damage and keep an enemy focused on them. How is that going to translate into 5th edition? Well, let's look at it. Now, a quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. So, in order to have that happen, we have these things that we call defining features. These are things that are either unique to the class or the class is kind of built around that will make it play very differently right from the beginning. In order to be classified as a defining feature, the feature has to show up within the first 2 levels. So we're going to start with a base class, and as I get to each of the defining features, I'm going to talk about how it is a defining feature and how it makes the class a little bit different. So first things first, the class itself, it's got a D10 hit die. So one of the higher hit dice, on par with like paladins and fighters. The only one that's got a bigger hit die is the barbarian, because barbarian, that's what they did to do. Makes sense with it being a tank in the MMO, and it's going to have a fair amount of hit points. Proficiencies, it gets all armor and shields. So this Gunbreaker, unlike the one in the MMO, can actually use shields. We'll also find out later they can 2-weapon fight pretty well as well. So that's pretty cool. Their weapon proficiencies, they have simple and martial weapons. They also have proficiency with pistols and muskets, which we'll talk about during the wrap-up because they don't really come up a ton here. But the pistols and muskets, and especially one of the subclasses we'll talk about in a later video, do get confusing, I guess, would be the best way to talk about it. And then tools, they get Smith's tools, which are very important to them. That's how they do their gun breaking. The saving throws they get are strength and dexterity, which is an interesting combo of saving throws. You generally don't get both, to my knowledge, but they're both pretty useful. Dexterity by far is the most useful because that's the majority of spells and traps and things like that you have to make dex saves from. It's really useful for that. Strength, a lot of that is going to be force movement, grapples, the things like that you would make strength saving throws against. So they are a bit immovable, and again, they're good at taking damage because with their proficiency in dex saves, they'll be taking half damage often because they'll be making their dex saves. And then skills, you can choose 2 from athletics, acrobatics, history, investigation, intimidation, persuasion, stealth, and survival. I am going to say right now, we will talk about it in a little bit. Intimidation is really important for the Gunbreaker. We will find out why a little later, and I really like why it is important and how this makes this such an interesting character. Excuse me for just a second. All right, and then their equipment, they can start with scale or leather armor. The next choice is a martial weapon. The next thing they get is a martial weapon, which has already been converted to a gunblade. The next one is either a shield or a pistol and 20 bullets. The next one is an explorer's pack or a dungeoneer's pack. And the final one is Smith's tools. So that's all the stuff they start off with. Obviously, you can also get more stuff from your background, but we're not going to go into backgrounds right now. Starting at level 1, they actually get 3 different things. Now, I've mentioned before, starting a class with like 3 or 4 things, to me, gets a little bit rough. I generally tend to like to see them spread out a little bit more because you're kind of heavy loading the start of the class, and it just it can get a little overpowered. This one, however, the first 2 things that you get are just kind of explanations of how your mechanics are going to work. They don't technically give you a new ability. They're just how you're going to play the class, how it's possible to play the class. So the first thing you get at level 1 is called Arms Smith. Beginning at first level, you've learned how to modify weaponry to incorporate a gunfire into their function. You spend 1 day of time working on your weapon to complete the conversion process. Now, they do have a little side part here that explains what gun weapons are. In the actual game itself, gun blades are literally a revolver handle with a relatively thick sword attached to it. It's a single bladed weapon. It generally tends to come to a point, and in D&D terms, it would be considered a versatile weapon. Some might consider it a two-handed weapon, but you carry it on your shoulder, and when you attack, you generally tend to use 2 hands, but you'll see them use it one-handed as well. So that's where I get the versatile idea from. So the traditional gunblade is going to be a long sword. is what's going to translate. But the little gun weapons aside here specifically says you can convert any weapon into a gun weapon. And all that means is you effectively add a revolver chamber to it and a trigger so that you can pull the trigger and effectively energize the weapon to make it do different things. That's what it is. You're not actually loading bullets in or anything like that. We'll talk about what you actually load into it in just a second here. But that's what it is. So theoretically, you can change a pistol into a gun weapon. Despite the fact that the pistol already has a chamber, all the armsmith is talking about is converting a weapon into something that allows you to use your special gunbreaker abilities. So that's what that is. Again, it's described relatively well here, but I would like a little bit more specification, because it doesn't particularly say you can turn a pistol or a rifle into a quote-unquote gun weapon. But it doesn't say you can't either. It doesn't say melee weapons. It's just weapons in general. So because of that wording, according to how D&D 5e wording works, you can transform like a longbow theoretically could turn into a gun weapon. It is a martial weapon. So yeah, like I said, it's a little confusing. But as you read through the subclasses and that, it starts making a little bit more sense. So that is Armsmith. The second thing you get at first level is called Munitions. Basically, you've learned how to create cells which draw in magical energy from your body to charge themselves, called munitions. You have a number of munition charges your body can support, indicated on the class table above. You start with 1 munition charge. You get another one every level you could go up. So at level 20, you have 20 munitions charges. You load up to 6 munitions charges into your gunblade at a time. When you use munition charges on attack rolls, you expend a loaded charge. You may load more charges as an action. And then when using abilities triggered through your munitions that require enemies make a saving throw, the saving throw is calculated as follows. The Gunbreaker save DC is 8 plus proficiency plus your strength. When you do a ranged attack, your Gunbreaker ranged attack modifier is proficiency plus your dex mod. So yeah, basically the Gunbreaker is a quote-unquote mad class, multi-attribute dependent class, and it actually uses both strength and dexterity, which is kind of a unique thing. Generally, most classes in 5th edition will use either strength or dexterity. Dexterity is always useful for the most part. Again, dex saves are really prevalent. Most armor uses at least part of your dexterity modifier to increase your AC, and dexterity applies to your initiative. Strength is used for a lot of attack rolls. Any melee weapon can use strength as their attack roll. It's used for damage rolls for those weapons. It's used for athletics checks, which are used for everything from climbing up buildings. Strength saves are generally done to prevent forced movement. So both of them are relatively useful, but you generally only focus on one or the other. The Gunbreaker focuses on both. So having high strength and dexterity scores are actually really useful. Your strength scores is going to translate directly to weapon damage for the most part, and all your Gunbreaker saves are going to be based on your strength, whereas your dexterity is going to be useful for your armor class if you're not wearing heavy armor. And for all your ranged attacks, which one of the subclasses is built around ranged attacks. So you can go either way, which is interesting. So that's munitions. Again, it sounds more complicated than it is, and it does do something that 5th edition has tried to shy away from, which is to give you an additional thing to track. In general, Fifth edition will generally only give you one additional thing to track. For monks, it's your key. For sorcerers, it's your sorcery points. And that's generally it. Everything else will be built into another system, like spell slots or things like that. Like paladins don't get smite slots. They just use the spell slots as part of another system. This technically gives you two things. You have your munitions you have to track, and then you also have to track how many munitions you have loaded into your gunblade at that particular time, which can be a little bit annoying, but it is a limiting factor that is necessary as we start seeing the other things they can do. There's also a lore aspect to it, but I'm focusing a little bit more on the mechanics and limiting the amount of munitions you can use without having to use a reload is an important limiting factor in this class. And without it, the class would be very, very broken. So, yeah, I'm not thrilled about it, but I think it's the best way they could have implemented it. And it will make playing this class a little bit more, I guess, tracking intensive than a lot of other classes you might play. Which I personally enjoy, but that means newer players may not want to start with this class. The final thing you get at the first level is called Burst Strike. When you make a successful melee weapon attack with a gunblade, you may expend 1 munitions charge to pull your weapon's trigger and attempt to launch your enemy backwards. Creatures make a con save against your Gunbreaker save DC, so strength. On a failure, they take 1d10 thunder damage and are knocked back 10 feet from your position. They're not knocked back on a success, and the damage increases to 2d10 at 6, 3d10 at 12, 4d10 at 18th level. So this is one of the defining features of the Gunbreaker, is when they hit something, they can add a little extra onto it. It's actually very, very similar to the Paladin Smite. It does additional damage. It gets more powerful. But the big change is the fact that it can knock back enemies. So this is simultaneously additional damage, so what you might consider a DPS ability, and a control ability. I've mentioned many times being able to choose where your enemies are standing is really, really useful in 5th edition. It was something that kind of took the spotlight in 4th edition, where you had an entire subset of classes called controllers, that their main job was to control the battlefield. They would move enemies around, they would move allies around, and they would control the terrain. 5th edition moved away from that a little bit, but you will have classes every so often, like the open hand monk has the ability to move characters anytime they use flurry of blows. This is kind of similar. There's actually quite a few similarities between the Gunbreaker and the monk that I kind of enjoy, and some that I'll talk about later that I think are maybe a little too similar. But that's kind of what you want to be using the Burst Strike for, is not just the additional damage. The additional damage is nice, but this is not going to be like a Paladin's Smite. One of the kind of big things about the Paladin Smite is it adds the additional damage onto the attack. So Paladin Smites explode on criticals. So anytime a Paladin rolls a critical hit, they will always smite if they can, or that's how you should play a Paladin, is if you roll a critical hit, you should add some sort of smite on there because you're going to get double the amount of the damage for it. This, however, has the creature make a con save, so it's separate from the attack, so this is never going to explode. This actually can't explode into a critical because this is a saving throw, not an attack roll. So that changes things a little bit, and again, thank you for phone. And again, because of that knockback of 10 feet, it does mean you have to kind of choose your time to use this, because if you use this, like you run up to an enemy, use all your movement to do it, you attack with your first attack and you knock them back, well, now they're 10 feet back, you've wasted any other attacks you wanted to make that turn. So you do need to know when you're using this, physically when to use it. Now, one thing they don't really mention here is whether they take damage on a success. They've specifically mentioned they're not knocked back on a success, but they don't mention taking damage. Now, with how the wording is here, the way I would read it from a 5th edition standpoint is it says on a failure, they take a d10 of thunder damage and are knocked back on to the 10 feet. Meaning on a success, neither of those things happen. They do put that emphasis on they're not knocked back on a success in there. But as it is written right now, I would read it as they don't take the damage as well. If the people that write this are actually looking at this, if you don't want it to read that way, I would say reword it to the creatures make a Constitution saving throw against your Gunbreaker DC right before that. So right after attempt to launch your enemies backwards, say they take a d10 of thunder damage and have to make a Constitution saving throw against your Gunbreaker DC. On a failure, they're knocked back 10 feet. On a success, they're not. So if you do want this damage to always happen, you should reword it as talk about the damage before the save. Because the way it's worded here, it means that the damage only happens on a failure. And on a success, it's effectively wasted. Which, with how the class goes further on, I'm not really upset if it will waste like that, because the class does get very, very powerful very quickly, and the damage gets much, much higher as they go as well. So being able to kind of limit it in that way does make sense to me. So that's level 1. Going to level 2, they get 2 things. First thing you get is a fighting style. These are very, very similar fighting styles that we've seen many, many times before. So nothing too fancy. Defense, dueling, great weapon fighting. Gunner is a new one we'll talk about in just a second here. That is exclusive to the Gunbreaker. And then protection and 2-weapon fighting. What this does say to me, though, is because they have the option of either great weapon fighting, 2-weapon fighting, or to dueling, those are basically your 3 different melee fighting aspects. Dueling is designed for single weapons, and it's designed to actually work with a shield. So if you want to sword and board your Gunbreaker, you can, and the dueling fighting style works very well for that. The protection fighting style requires a shield, so this is a class that's designed to work with shields. Great weapon fighting is meant for 2-handed heavy weapons like great swords and great axes and mauls and things like that. So this is designed to work that way too. And then 2-weapon fighting, you can have 2 gunblades, which I just think is massively cool. I wish you could dual wield gunblades in Final Fantasy XIV, because that would be badass. But I understand why they don't. But yeah, 2-weapon fighting means you can dual wield gunblades, which again makes that burst strike even more powerful, because instead of being able to only, even at just level 1, being able to dual wield means you can burst strike twice. Meaning, as long as they fail their con save, which at level 1 they're probably going to, you're not going to be dealing with creatures that generally have high con scores. That means if you're using short swords, which is generally what you would use to dual wield, and both of them are gunblades, because there's no limitation to how many gunblades you can have created. Basically, you would be able to do 2d6 plus 2d10 damage at level 1 in a single turn, which is a lot. That's enough to take out most challenge rating enemies all the way up to around challenge rating 1 or 2 without any difficulty, without crits. If you were to human this and get in dual wielding, so you can have 2 long swords instead of 2 short swords, that just gives you more damage. Or you were to use one of the damage type feats, like the piercing damage type feat, which gives you extra damage on criticals or things like that. Like, there's a lot of ways that you could turn this into a really, really effective, powerful fighter right from level 1. And then level 2, they kind of reinforce that with being able to allow you to basically add your ability modifier damage to your offhand attacks. So it starts becoming very, very powerful. The second thing you get at second level is the other defining feature of the Gunbreaker, which is called Gunner Shot. And that we're actually going to go back to the fighting styles real quick to talk about the Gunner fighting style. The Gunner fighting style is you get a +2 bonus to attack rolls you make with your Gunner Shot action. So what's the Gunner Shot? Well, you gain a new attack option that you can use with the attack action. This special attack is a ranged weapon attack with a range of 60 feet, which you may only use while wielding a gunblade. You're proficient with it, and you add your dexterity modifier to the attack and damage rolls. Its damage is thunder, and its damage die is a d10. This damage increases to 2d10 at 6, 3d10 at 12, and 4d10 at 18th. You expend 1 munitions charge when you use this attack option, and when you gain the extra attack feature, spoilers, this special attack can be used for any of the attacks you make as part of the attack action. So, Gunner Shot effectively means your Gunbreaker can be a ranged character to a point. You are limited by your munitions, which I forgot to mention. Half of your expended munitions rounded up are recharged after completing a short rest, and all your munitions after a long rest. So Gunbreakers are short rest dependent, like monks and warlocks. They get a large benefit out of short resting. In this case, getting their munitions back. So Gunner Shot is limited to your munitions, meaning at low levels you're very rarely, if ever, going to be using it. And higher levels, when you have 13 or 14 munitions, you might be using it all the time. The big downfall of Gunner Shot is Burst Strike requires a successful melee weapon attack, whereas Gunner is a ranged attack. So the base class, you have to choose one or the other. One of the subclasses deals with that, and again, when we talk about the subclasses, we'll talk about that. But for the most part, you can either be focusing on your Burst Strike and being very mobile, or your Gunner Shot and be a little bit more ranged. This is where turning a pistol or a musket into your gunblade is going to be beneficial, because that'll mean you can make your normal attacks, and then every so often you can do a Gunner Shot with your pistol to just add some extra damage. So yeah, that's level 2. At level 3, you choose your Gunbreaker archetype. We will go through the Gunbreaker archetypes just like we normally do in a separate video for each. But to let you know what they are, you have the Breaker style, the Lionheart style, and the Revolver style. Breaker takes its name directly from Gunbreaker. Lionheart takes its name from the ultimate weapon for Squall in Final Fantasy VIII, and Revolver actually takes its name from the first weapon that Squall starts with. It's the weapon that he uses in all the cutscenes. It's called the Revolver. So there is a little bit of lore built into that. It's one of the things that Final Fantasy XIV does really, really well, is they bake lore from previous Final Fantasy games into their new one without breaking their game for these little kind of fan service things. So I really like that. 4th level gets your ability score improvement. We all know how that works. Increase one of your ability scores by 2, 2 of your ability scores by 1, or pick a feat. Yeah, we're not going to go into super huge detail about that, because I've done videos on feats. Watch them if you want to know cool stuff you can do. 5th level, you get extra attack. It's exactly what it sounds like. You get attacked twice instead of once. This is how basically all weapons-based classes work. The fighter eventually gets 3 and 4 attacks. Everybody else, paladins, rangers, monks, you all get the extra attack ability, which just gives you take the attack action, you make 2 attacks instead of 1. Makes perfect sense. It's been used over and over. Makes perfect sense for this. At 7th level, you get what's called Quick Hand, which modifies your munitions. Remember, I mentioned before, you can only have 6 munitions loaded at a time. Anytime you run out of those, you have to spend an action to reload and put 6 more munitions in. With Quick Hand, and it's an action to load those munitions. With Quick Hand, You can reload your munitions as a bonus action, and you can load up to 8 at a time. When I do my final thoughts on this, I'll talk a little bit more about the limitations of 6 and 8. The reason they have 6 and 8 is your standard revolver is a 6-shot revolver, and I believe they do have 8-shot revolvers. I'm not 100% certain on that. I am not a huge gun firearms dude, but I do believe they make 8-shot revolvers. So the choice between 6 and 8 is not an arbitrary one. It's related to how revolvers generally work, I believe. And yeah, this does change up the class a little bit. Again, before you would have to burn your action, which at this point would be 2 attacks to be able to reload your munitions. So it was a very limited resource, unlike, let's say, the Monk's Key, where anytime they attack, they can, stun or add on to something. They can always use their key. They don't have to track that. So now it is significantly less limiting. If you're dual wielding, it means you're giving up an attack. But if you are using a two-handed weapon, or you're going sword and board for your Gunbreaker, this is simply giving you a use for your bonus action. We talk about action economy all the time because in the 5th edition, action economy is really important. Whichever side on a fight has more things they can do, more actions, is going to have an advantage. So simply being able to use your bonus action on a regular basis gives your team an advantage. So this is a really useful thing, and it does mean you can be a lot less stingy with either your Gunbreaker shots, or your gunner shots, or your burst strike. Because now you don't have to go, okay, well, I'm going to have to burn a turn reloading. No, now I only have to burn a bonus action. I can still get some damage in and do a lot. So it definitely feeds into both of those defining features, just allowing you to be able to use them a lot more often. At 9th level, and this is probably one of my favorite abilities of this, you get what's called Diplomatic Enforcer. And I have to read how they worded this because it's such an interesting move. Basically, while you are within 10 feet of an ally and visible to the target creature, they double their proficiency bonus when making persuasion, deception, and intimidation checks. Now, this is worded slightly poorly because they is not defined. It is an undefined pronoun. They theoretically could refer to the target creature or your ally from a linguistic standpoint. So how it should read, and the only way that it actually makes sense, is your ally doubles their proficiency bonus when making persuasions, deception, and intimidation checks against that character. If a medium or smaller creature is missing hit points, you gain advantage on intimidation checks against that creature. So basically, I mentioned before, intimidation is important to the Gunbreaker. This is why. First of all, the Gunbreaker simply being there and being visible from visible to a character that one of your allies is talking to makes that person a little uneasy. They are an intimidating presence just in general. The massive gun with the trigger on it slung on their back makes people wary, and it makes them easier to influence, whether that's through intimidation, whether that's through persuasion, or outright lying. I love that. I love the idea that simply by the character being there, you're going to help your allies do cool stuff. There aren't a lot of abilities that work that way, whereas the big benefit of this ability, for the most part, is going to be for your allies, not for your character. And it does kind of fit into the core idea of 5th edition D&D and D&D in general, which is you are not a lone adventurer. You are not the warrior of light, to use Final Fantasy terms. You are part of a group of adventurers that needs to work together. And this is built on that. So you don't need to have a high charisma score to get any benefit out of this. Now, the second thing, you get advantage on creatures that are missing health. That's a little bit more self-focused, which it should be. And it does mean that a decent charisma score is going to be beneficial. But if you're already trained in this, you're not going to need a massive intimidation score to be able to get this. And we'll talk about something later that makes this even more useful. But overall, yeah, Diplomatic Enforcer is such a cool ability that I just love. I think it's super cool. At 11th level, you get Blasting Zone. Blasting Zone is actually one of the limit breaks of Squall, and it's actually ability in Final Fantasy XIV. So again, lots of kind of fan service stuff. I like it. And it is taken directly from Final Fantasy XIV, which is what this is supposed to be. When you make a successful melee weapon attack with a gunblade, instead of using your burst strike feature, you may expend 3 munition charges to cause an explosion originating from you in the direction of the target. All creatures in the 30-foot cone must make a dex save against your Gunbreaker save. The creature takes 3d10 fire damage on a failure and half as much on a success. Damage increases to 4d10 at 15, 5d10 at 20th, and you can only use Blasting Zone once per round. You can also use your action to use Blasting Zone without making a successful melee weapon attack. So, there's a lot to unpack here. This effectively gives them an area damage thing. It's a 30-foot cone, which is similar to something like a Burning Hands. It's a nice amount of space. You can get a fair amount of enemies in there, and 3d10 at 11th level is nothing to be ashamed of. It's effectively the equivalent of like a 1st or 2nd level area spell, which for a non-magical class is pretty good. And as it gets higher, getting 5d10 is going to be much closer to like a 5th, not a 5th, a 3rd or a 4th level spell that you can use multiple times. Nothing breaking up about it. I like the fact that they say you can only use it once per round, because letting you do that twice per round or 3 times if you're dual wielding would make this very, very broken and would let them outclass even wizards as far as damage was concerned. They would be going through munitions charges like crazy, but they could do it. Technically, they would be limited to 2 of those if they didn't limit it anyway. But anyway, they limit it that way. Now, the other way you can do it is you can just use your action, which means you're sacrificing one of your attacks to be able to do this wherever you want. And the real benefit for that is if you can't line up the people starting with a single enemy. And what I mean is if you are looking at an enemy and you have maybe 3 enemies right next to each other, or 3 enemies within about 10 feet, if the explosion has to happen starting at one of the enemies, you might not be able to shape it in a way where you can get all 3 of them. So you might have to kind of avoid using it on one of them in order to be able to do it based on where an enemy is. However, if you can just do it anywhere you want, that gives you the option of being able to use it at the exact right place and get the most enemies in there without having to hope that an enemy is in the right spot to start it. It also means getting around your allies is a little bit easier. Again, if you have to do it when you strike an enemy, depending on where you're placed around that enemy, if you have an ally nearby, it means you might be hitting them, and you can't turn it at all unless you physically move your character around. So it does give you choices. Neither one is going to be the right choice every single time, which I like. That is the definition of choice in D&D 5e. If they give you a choice, but there's always a right answer, that's not really a choice. That is the illusion of choice. And this does seem to actually give you 2 choices. So I like that. I like the fact that it takes 3 munitions rounds. I like the fact you could only do it once per turn. Again, this could very easily get broken very, very quickly. And those limiting aspects of it does make it very balanced, but still very cool and cinematic. At 13th level, you get what's called Heart of the Vanguard. You have advantage on saving throws against being charmed and frightened, and you gain proficiency in the intimidation skill. If you already have this skill, you gain expertise in it. This is another reason why being proficient in intimidation is important, because at 13 level, you will gain expertise in it. Meaning even if you have a low charisma score, your intimidation is going to be on par with most people that are trained in it. So you really don't need a charisma score at all with this Heart of the Vanguard. The other thing, advantage against being charmed and frightened is useful. A lot of different classes have either advantage or immunity to it, so it's nothing fancy, but it's always useful. Charmed abilities are really, really bad, especially since you already need a really good strength and a dexterity. You're probably not going to have a massive wisdom score, because you're also going to want a decent constitution so you can take some damage. So being able to have advantage, most charm abilities are wisdom saves. Some might be intelligence saves. Either way, you're not going to have high scores in those. This is going to be very, very useful for you. At 15th level, you get what's called Heart of Stone, which is another one I think is really, really interesting. When you're attacked by a melee weapon while wielding a gunblade, as a reaction, you may expend 1 munition to gain a +3 bonus to your AC against the attack roll. You must make this declaration before the attack roll result has been confirmed. This is one where the wording is weird, and I'm not exactly sure what they mean by this. So confirming a roll in 5th edition isn't a thing. In Pathfinder, they had this thing where you would have to confirm your critical hits, which is basically if you got a critical, you would have to roll again to make sure that you actually hit. And if you didn't roll high enough to hit a second time, it wasn't a critical hit. It just made critical hits that much more difficult to roll. And it's called confirming the critical. They don't have a confirming anything in 5th edition. The closest thing I can see to this is there are abilities that say you can use this ability after you see the die result, but before learning if the attack hits or misses, or something like that. But in this particular instance, because it's the DM rolling, a lot of times you're not going to see what the die roll is. You're just going to hear what the result is. And quote unquote confirming it, you're going to know what your AC is. So before you officially confirm whether it hits or misses, you're already going to know. So I'm not sure if this is supposed to mean the DM has to roll the attack rolls in front of you, because a lot of DMs don't. They always roll behind their screen. Or if this is supposed to kind of mimic the idea of if you make an attack roll, you have to make your decision before the DM tells you if the attack roll hits or something like that, which doesn't work because the attack roll is against you. The way I would want to read this is you get to make the decision after you hear what the roll is, before any damage is rolled, is what I would like to view it as, because you don't know if they're going to roll a small amount for it, but you will know if they hit you or not, so that you don't, because it doesn't specifically say you have to do this before the attack is rolled, because that would mean you could waste your munitions on this, and Burst Strike already allows you to waste munitions. I don't think we need multiple things that make your munitions possibly worthless. Because if you have to do it before and they get a nat 1, and you've already used this Heart of Stone aspect, then it's kind of a waste. So this would be something that I think needs clarification, specifically what they mean by the result has been confirmed. Because you don't confirm things in 5th edition to D&D. And the way I would want it to be is you have to choose to do it after you know if it hits, but before they roll damage, because it still means you might not get a huge benefit out of it simply because you might you don't know how much damage you're going to roll, but you're never going to really waste your munition, if that makes sense. At 17th level, which they have a typo here saying beginning at 11th level, but if you look at the table in the beginning, it does say Sonic Breakers. It's just a 17th level. So if you are watching this, there's a typo on page 73 under Sonic Breaker. It says beginning at 11th level. It should say 17th. So beginning at 17th level, when you make a successful melee weapon attack with a gunblade, instead of using your burst strike feature, you may expend 3 munitions charges to cause a massive shockwave originating from you in the direction of the target. All creatures in a 60-foot long, 5-foot wide line must make a dex save against your Gunbreaker save DC. Creatures take 4d10 thunder damage on a fail, half as much on a success, 5d10 at 20th level. You can only use it once per round. And you can also use your action to use Sonic Breaker without making a successful melee weapon attack. So effectively, Blasting Zone, Sonic Breaker are both different uses of your burst strike that just use more charges and do different things. And the only difference between them, they do the exact same damage. The only difference between them is Blasting Zone is a 30-foot cone. Sonic Breaker is a 60-foot line. Again, both of those are very, very useful. Both of them will have uses in different situations. Neither of them is always going to be the right decision every single time. And because they're both 3 munitions a piece and can only be used once, it's basically both Blasting Zone and Sonic Breaker are modifications of your burst strike that give it more abilities, is effectively what they are. They call them different techniques, but they are just different versions of burst strike. And as far as 5th edition class design works, that is exactly what you want to do with a defining feature. As you get a higher level, you should have better uses of your defining feature. And that's exactly what these are. And I like them. Again, it gives the Gunbreaker a lot of versatility, where if you want to use the burst strike, you can. And you can use it to move enemies around and do a little bit extra damage. Or you can use Blasting Zone or Sonic Breaker to forget moving them around and just do extra damage, which is really, really nice and can hit multiple enemies. So overall, very interesting. But again, everything I said about Blasting Zone, the same thing with Sonic Breaker. It's just a different shape, which I'm not upset about. I think it's a good thing to do. Yeah. Finally, at 18th level, you get Bloodfest. Being at 18th level is a bonus action. You may recover half your munitions. You may do so once before requiring a long rest. So this effectively, at 18th level, that means as a bonus action, you can regain 9 munitions. That, again, means you can go ham with your Burst Strike, with your Blasting Zone, with your Sonic Breaker, or with your Gunner Shot. Whichever way you want to go with this, Bloodfest just means you can use it more and more and more. Which does, for the base class, doesn't really provide any issues. The class itself, well, let's do it this way. Let's go final thoughts. Overall, I like the Gunbreaker, the base class itself. I don't think it's overpowered as a base class. Now, you cannot play just the Gunbreaker. You have to choose one of the combat styles, one of the subclasses, which modify how the things work, and those do unbalance it a bit, and I'll talk about how it unbalances it when I talk about each one of them in a later video. But overall, I like the Gunbreaker. I think it's really, really cool. I like the munitions. I do have to say, in the game itself, you are limited to a maximum of 2 shots loaded into your gunblade at any given time. and you actually earn them as you attack. You can't really do that in 5th edition as how the rules are created right now. So I like just loading them in. It makes sense. I think 6 and definitely 8 is a bit much, especially since you can use a bonus action to load them. I think limiting it to 2 and then with Quick Hand having 4 at a time makes a little bit more sense and does make your munitions a little bit more valuable to you and a little bit more limited, which when we start dealing with the subclasses is important, because with the subclasses in this, the class becomes broken very, very quickly and can outdamage level 9 spells by a significant proportion. So yeah, that would probably be my biggest critique, is probably under munitions, limit it to 2 munitions at level 1 up to 4 munitions at level 7. At those low levels, like a lot of people might be thinking, well, that's really going to handicap your ability to use them. Not really, because at those low levels, you only have, up to 6th level, you only have a maximum of 6 charges. So throughout the day, you are never going to use your action to reload, because you simply don't have enough munitions. You're only really going to start reloading at level 9. Up until that point, you will never reload if you can put in 6 shots right from the beginning. So I think lessening it down to 2 fits with the class a little bit more as far as Final Fantasy 14 is concerned, because it actually matches it correctly. And then it does give Quick Hand a little bit more benefit. And then when you get to higher levels, it is going to limit your ability to do massive amounts of damage, which you don't really want. Again, you want to feel powerful, but compared to other melee classes, you don't want to feel overpowered. And I think once you get above like level 13 or 14, you simply just start becoming really, really, really powerful. When you start mixing things like Blasting Zone and Sonic Breaker, you can technically use each of those on a in a single turn. You can only use Blasting Zone once per round. You can only use Sonic Breaker once per round, but it doesn't say you can't use both of them. So if you're a dual-wielding Gunbreaker, you could, on 3 attacks, you could use Blasting Zone in the first one, and let's just do it at 20th level to make things this simple. So you're using a longsword in each hand. If you're a dual wielder, you will have dual wielding by then. So your longsword in each hand. Your Blasting Zone, your first attack is going to do 1d8 plus you're going to have a 20 strength by 20. So plus 5. Plus you're going to Blasting Zone, so you're going to do plus 5d to 10. So your first attack is 1d8 plus 5d10. Your second attack, you're going to do it again. You'll get 2d8 plus another 5d10. And then your third attack, your offhand attack, is going to be another d8 plus from Burst Strike 4d10. So grand total in a single round, using 7 cartridges, which is very, very possible to do if you have up to 8, you are doing 3d8 plus 15 for your regular attacks, plus 14d10 damage. Now, to put that in perspective, I'm going to really, really quick... I don't have D&D Beyond open. Normally I do, because I read all of this out of D&D Beyond. Yeah, no. Spell level. I want to go to a 9th level spell. Okay, so filters spells. Come on. Give me a really, really powerful... All right, we'll do Meteor Swarm. A 9th level Meteor Swarm, which is a 9th level ability you can only use. Generally, you can only cast this once, maybe twice. does 20d6 fire damage, 20d6 bludgeoning damage. So 40 d6, which with just a simple math is a maximum of 240 damage. 14d10 is 140 damage plus another 324 164 damage you can do, and you can do that in the current way this is built. You can do that 3 times in a fight. If you use both Bloodfest and your quick hand to reload a few times, you can easily get 3 of those done, and then take a short rest and be able to do 2, at least 1 more every fight afterwards, as long as there's just a short rest. Meaning you can pretty easily outclass a wizard, which should be the class that can which should be able to kill just about anything. With my suggestion of turning it just to 2 and then 4 with quick hand in a single load, it'll still allow you to do Blasting Zone or Sonic Breaker and a Burst Strike without letting you outclass a wizard without much difficulty, which you shouldn't be able to do, especially since if you start adding on magic weapons and critical hits, which Meteor Swarm can never critical hit, whereas your attack can, and if you also have a magic like a flame, a fire sword that I can't remember what it's called anymore, any of those the things, you would be able to very easily outclass the damage of a wizard without even trying. Which shouldn't be the thing. I'm not saying wizards should be the most damaging class ever. However, that's what their class is kind of built around if they did do it that way. And that's not the only thing this class can do. This class is also able to wear heavy armor, and they can increase their AC on every attack roll against them, and all these other things. It's one of those things where this class just does too many things. So that would be my one kind of critique of this is shrink down the number you can put in the chamber at once, and that will balance the rest of the class really, really well. Otherwise, I really like this class. Again, I'm a Gunbreaker in Final Fantasy XIV. With that one change, I would allow this class to be played at my table any day of the week. I think it's massively fun. I think it's really interesting. I think the visuals of it are really cool. I think you can make really, really interesting characters with it. If you're playing in a world, if you're playing in the Final Fantasy XIV world of Eorzea, this makes cool. This could be cool. But if you put the Gunbreaker in your own worlds, I think it would be really interesting to see where does this come from. Is it an offshoot of like Matt Mercer's Gunslinger subclass for the fighter? Is it something that happened when artificers started, battlesmiths started getting a little bit more aggressive with how they wanted to fight? Like, there's so many different ways you could add this as a character in lore. And like I said, the only real factor I see to this that could potentially make it really, really overpowered at high levels is how many munitions you can load at a single time. Other than that, I think it's really well balanced. The damage all makes sense. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah. That is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and turn notifications on in the comments down below. Let me know what kind of gunblade would you want for your Gunbreaker? Do you want to go the traditional route of like a long sword kind of thing, or a short sword? Do you want to have gun daggers? Do you want to have a gun staff? Or a gun maul, or a gun axe? What kind of gunblade do you want to make for your character? Let me know in the comments down below. Again, there is a link to the Reddit where you can find all the information. You can talk to these people about this. Please check it out. It is amazingly cool. All the people that have contributed to this have put a ton of work into it, and it shows. It is such a really cool, well-designed piece of homebrew content. Please to check it out. Tell them that I sent you. Tell them that I'm doing this. I'm going to try and post these to there, see if anyone watches it. But yeah, otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.